Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor. We discussed the history of the English novel in our previous session. So today we will focus our attention towards Thomas Hardy, his life and writings. So as we already know, Thomas Hardy is a writer of the Victorian era. He is a versatile writer whose literary output includes not just novels but also poetry, drama and short stories. In most of his works, it is very evident that he had empathy and compassion towards the underprivileged people. That is, those people who were at the hands of social injustice, those people who were the victims of social injustice and other Victorian moral codes. Yes, so in this particular unit, we'll understand the talent of Thomas Hardy as a writer, the three phases of his writing, the classification of his novels. We'll study about Wessex as the location and setting of his novels. We'll study the novel of realism as exponented by Hardy. We'll also learn the major features of his novels and finally his religious beliefs. So if we look at Thomas Hardy's works, these can be divided into the early phase, the middle phase and the later years. That is, there can be three divisions on the basis of what and how he has written. So these three phases roughly correspond to two genres of his writing: poetry, fiction, and again a return of poetry. This means that during the early phase he wrote poetry. In the middle phase he came to fiction. And what happened in the later years, he once again started writing poetry. Between the years 1867 and 1872, when he was in his 20s and early 30s, he wrote three novels. Which are the three novels? The Poor Man and the Lady, Desperate Remedies, Under the Greenwood Tree. So you need to remember the main works of Thomas Hardy. So if we look at The Poor Man and the Lady, this can be considered as a class conscious novel. Remember, this novel was never published. So Desperate Remedies, it is a story with a dense plot. Alright, Under the Greenwood Tree is a humorous novel that revealed his own style of writing. In the year 1872, he wrote his next novel, A Pair of Blue Eyes. It became a very popular novel. Later, he published this particular work that we are about to study, that is Far from the Madding Crowd. So this novel is significant mainly due to two major reasons. Firstly, this was the first of the Wessex novel. What do you mean by Wessex novel? In some novels written by Hardy, the setting is a place called Wessex. So if you remember the Indian writer R.K. Narayan, his stories are set in a particular place. Do you remember the place? Yes, Suraj, very much correct. Malgudi days. Malgudi is the setting of the works of R.K. Narayan. So do you think there exists a place called Malgudi? Is that a real place or is it an imaginary place? Yes, correct. It is an imaginary place created by the writer as if a setting for his novel. Similarly, Wessex is also a place, an imaginary fictitious place created by Thomas Hardy, and Wessex serves as the setting of most of his novels. So the very first novel that displayed Wessex as its setting is Far From the Madding Crowd. So these were the novels that he wrote during the early phase. Apart from the poetry, we are not discussing poetry because we are focusing our study on novels now. That is why we are not mentioning his poems. In the middle period, his novels got mixed responses. Remember, Pair of Blue Eyes, Far From the Madding Crowd, etc. got immense popularity, but those novels that he wrote afterwards, such as The Return of the Native, The Trumpet Major, etc., did not receive that much popularity. Alright, his later novels were popular though, that is The Mayor of Casterbridge, Jude the Obscure, etc. are his outstanding works. They deal with the socio-economic issues of the day, and these portrayed representations of the working class people. As I mentioned, he also wrote numerous poetry. It is of great importance to mention his poetry writing as well. When his poetry written in his early years did not receive favorable response, he switched to fiction. That is what happened. But later he returned to poetry at the turn of the century, that is during the 20th century, the later phase of his writing. He wrote some poetry. He published his first volume of poetry, Wessex Poems, in 1898. Thereafter, he also published a drama called The Dynasts. Okay, it is a 3-volume epic drama. So these are the mandatory mentions when it comes to the 3 phases of Thomas Hardy's writing. So he tried to make a classification of his own novels, mainly into 3 groups, that is, firstly, novels of character and environment, secondly, romances and fantasies, thirdly, novels of ingenuity. So firstly, under the banner of novels of character and environment, he placed Under the Greenwood Tree, Far From the Madding Crowd, Return of the Native, Mayor of Casterbridge, Tess of Dubervilles, and Jude the Obscure. Yes, you will have to study this. Alright, if you study this section, you will be able to place these works in other sections also. If there comes a question from other sessions also, you'll be able to place these there. So this is one section that you'll have to study. Yes, now comes romances and fantasies, A Pair of Blue Eyes, A Group of Noble Dames, then Well-Beloved Love, Novel of Ingenuity, that is The Hand of Ethelberta, then A Changed Man, etc. Now comes an important concept in Hardy's novels, that is Hardy's Wessex. I already gave you an introduction on this aspect. So let me ask you, are you able to follow me? Is everything clear so far? Yes, thank you. Thank you for responding. So Thomas Hardy's Wessex is a literary landscape that inspired the novels. Wessex became a part of his characters with its moods and destiny. Remember, he also wrote a collection of poems in 1898 titled Wessex Poems. So he made use of the setting not just for his novels but also as a title for his poetry collection. So Wessex, as I mentioned, was the fictional name Hardy gave to this part of southern England. This a part of southern England that is represented by Wessex. It is the setting of 4 major novels by Hardy. Now comes the question. Which are the 4 major novels that has Wessex as its setting? One we already know. That is Far From the Madding Crowd. The next one, Tess of Dubervilles. The spelling might be a bit difficult. Please do study. Now, the third one, Return of the Native. And finally, The Mayor of Casterbridge. We can also say that Charles Darwin has more or less influenced because his emphasis on environment can be seen as an example for the same. Now, if we look at Thomas Hardy and the novel of realism, we can find that most of his novels are realistic in nature. So now comes the question, what is realism in literature? It denotes a very faithful representation of the reality. Not at all fictitious, but the reality is being portrayed, and the special focus is given to the representation of the life of the middle class people. So, the realistic novels of the Victorian era dealt with the common man, the struggles of the lower classes, etc. Charles Dickens' Great Expectations and Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure are examples of the novels that show social realism. So the genre itself could be considered as of social realism. Sometimes realism is defined as slice of life writing. Remember that, slice of life writing that presents a close observation of the contemporary life. Realism in form relates to a literary technique that describes story elements such as setting, character, themes, etc. without using any decorative language. So if you are interested in learning about the setting, characteristics, etc., the various aspects of the novel, these are the aspects of the novel. It includes setting, character, themes, etc. I have explained this using the context of Harry Potter. Like most of you must have heard or at least enjoyed reading Harry Potter, right? It is an example of popular fiction we studied yesterday, remember? So yes, I have already uploaded a video based on Harry Potter. Let's have a look at the characteristics of realism in novels. So in those novels that are realistic in nature, there will be an emphasis on the common, the here and the now, and attention to specific action and verifiable consequences will be mentioned. They will evoke common actions and emphasize the minor problems of the middle class. You can write problems, it's fine. They employ simple language and write about issues of conduct. Characterization is also very important with respect to these aspects. Let's discuss the salient aspects of Hardy's novels, that is the special features of Hardy's novel. So he examines the social conventions that disturb the lives of the poor, especially the poor folk in Victorian England, and he also criticizes such conventions, especially those relating to marriage, education, religion, etc. So he speaks against the Victorian morality. So one of the major themes employed in his novels are fate or chance, because chance plays a predominant role, almost reducing most of his characters to puppets. Fate is not the same as destiny. Remember that. Though both these terms are often used as synonyms, how's that different? How are they different? Faith is which we cannot change. Destiny is something that holds the possibility of doing something by taking chances. Fate is irreversible, it cannot be changed. But destiny can be, because it holds the possibility of doing something by taking chances. Destiny is when we take chances even if we cannot control fate. So this particular novel, Far from the Madding Crowd, is an example of a novel in which chance has a major role. We will discuss this aspect when we deal with this novel in detail. Now a quick mention on Hardy's religious beliefs. That is, he belonged to a Christian family. He was a member of the Church of England. His family was Anglican, but still they were not very religious. He was disturbed by the struggles and the tragic events of life, and man struggled by confronting these struggles. So this made him question the traditional belief in Christianity. So he substituted the Christian God by the force called the will that controls the universe. He believed that it is not God but will that controls the universe, and he believed that the universe was devoid of meaning, and in place of the divine force controlling the universe, he put the blind and unconscious will. He gave importance to will rather than God. Therefore, we can say that he was not a very religious person, and he even questioned God. So, is that clear? So, with that, we come to the end of this unit. Here, we discussed the three phases of Thomas Hardy's writing, his classification of novel, his concept of Wessex, the novel of realism, and the salient aspects of Hardy's novels, including his religious beliefs. So, from the TEE perspective, you can expect short questions from this section. I don't think there will be an essay question. You can expect short questions on Wessex, then novel of realism, salient aspects of his novels, etc. So, if you find the language of your study material difficult to learn, you can also refer to the dictionary, or maybe you can Google and find synonyms for this word. So if you find a synonym, you can write it somewhere in the textbook, and while you write your own answer, you can make use of the synonym. There is no rule that the exact word should be written unless it is a keyword. For example, for realism, you can't find a synonym because that is something that is quite mandatory to this unit, right? So if it is not a keyword, if it is some English language word randomly used, you can make your own synonyms, or you can make the language of the text easy and prepare your own answer. But if you prepare for the TEE, make sure that you write the keywords and you mention the chief points in the textbook. Is that clear? So with that, we come to the end of this session. We'll discuss this particular novel, Far from the Madding Crowd, along with the summary and analysis in the next session.